really finding the resources and the support, as well as the emotional support, is something that I became very invested in. I walked that journey, finding as much support as we could. And then transitioning to Kauai, I still worked for a friend in jewelry stores, and I managed really beautiful jewelry stores over time after Grant died. And I kind of reconnected professionally with my HR world over time. But it's a journey. It's really a journey. And you need everybody who can support you on that journey.
Welcome to the Thriving Workplace Podcast,
the show that empowers your workplace to make a positive impact on your people, teams, and the entire organizational community.
Whether you're an employee, manager, or executive, we've got something for you.
Dive into inspiring ideas, practical tips, and meaningful conversations about employee well-being.
We're your hosts, Lauren and Jason, passionate workplace well-being champions from the Workplace Performance and Wellbeing Institute.
Join us as we bring in renowned experts and thoughtful leaders to share their wisdom, experiences, and innovative approaches to building a thriving workplace. Welcome back to another episode of the Thriving Workplace Podcast. This week, we're joined by a very special guest. She is the founder and CEO of Transitions Coaching Services with expertise in moving you forward through challenging transitions. She's a certified career coach, HR consultant, and a grief wellness professional. And she's also the author of the book, Over the Rainbow, From the Depths of Grief to Hope. So please welcome all the way from America to the Thriving Workplace Podcast, our friend Sheila Clemenson. Hello.
Hello. I am thrilled to be here with you today talking about a really important topic. And coming from Boulder, Colorado, outskirts of that area. And I'm happy to be visiting you in Australia today.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And I'd really like to kick off this podcast by asking you a little bit about, your story and maybe what you're doing now, but then how you got to where you are now.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Big question, I know.
It's a crazy story. And, I share it because I'm 56 now and I have an amazing life and I've rebuilt it to be that, fortunately. But at 26 years old, I was dating an amazing guy. He was in international sales. I was working in HR. We had a long distance, wild relationship. And the trip that got away for both of us was Australia and New Zealand, a 5-week adventure that I have still yet to go on. Okay.
Oh, okay. We've got to make it happen.
Yes. I was 26. He was 32. We had just gotten engaged, bought a house. We were planning a wedding. And he walked in the house as I was unpacking boxes. And he said, I saw the doctor that says that I have one of these diseases. And they were pamphlets that he set on the table. One was ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The other one was MS, multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
And the carpet was pulled out from under us. We're, living life large in a really fantastic place. It took a while to build that together. And Grant had been having some problems with coordinating and walking with his feet. And he thought that he had just skied his knees out. He saw an orthopedic specialist, and then they referred him to a neurologist, and this is what happened. ALS is a working diagnosis until you start to show more symptoms of that disease. And so we really could live in a little bit of denial initially in the beginning, right? Where we didn't know if this is what was going on. We were really trying to wrap our heads around having a terminal illness diagnosis at a young age. My husband has built his life in his profession and finally got promoted to international sales manager. He didn't want to give that up. So we kept quiet. We lived in a town in northern Michigan that was called Petoskey. About 10,000 people live in this town, and he worked in a town that only 4,000 people lived in, and everyone knew your business. So it was really important for us to keep things really quiet because he didn't want anyone to know he had this disease. So we started our life together, not telling people all around us that he was living a terminal illness. We were dealing with anticipatory grief off the charts, especially as his symptoms started progressing. He started walking with a cane. People started noticing that something was wrong, but I swore to him I wasn't going to say anything to anybody other than our close family and friends that were living out of the area. So, I share this because at 26 and 32 years old, you're not expecting to be dealing with this. And he looked at me at one point and he said, I want you to know that you don't need to marry me, that you can move forward in your life and you can go do something else. And I'm like, I've waited for you my whole life. I'm not going anywhere. I married him about 7 months after that diagnosis. In sickness and in health, till death do us part, those vows were, the gravity of those vows was serious. And, and I was there. I signed up for this. So at a certain point in his illness, he'd look at me and he'd say, so I think you bit off more than you can chew. And I said, yes, I did, but I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still wiping your butt and I am not going anywhere. And so we were on that journey together for 4.5 years. We phased out professionally in Northern Michigan after a couple of years. And then we did tell everyone what he had. And we moved to Kauai, Hawaii, because Grant didn't want to be a trapped house cat in a cold climate. And so his family had been going out to Kauai for years. They had a timeshare on the island. And it was 1997 at the time when we moved, which was 5 years after Hurricane Iniki, a Category 5 hurricane, had hit the island. And really, due to those circumstances, it made it realistic for us to afford renting a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home on the island for $500 a month. And because he'd been going out there since he was 15, we connected with Ohana, people on the island that we were close to. And we were able to find all of the resources and support that we needed, while at the same time, Grant was able to leave his professional community and his friends and our friends because he didn't want them to see him die in this debilitating progressive disease. So I share all of this. And when we look at this Thriving Workplace podcast, right, we go, holy cow, we're living in a great place in our profession and dealing with a terminal illness. How did we make it through that while working full time? And then I started taking on more caregiver responsibilities because Grant lost the ability to do more for himself. And I'm going to tell you how we could do it back then was having amazing employers and amazing managers, direct managers who, my manager, I brought him into the loop because I had to. I couldn't show up for work and then say, I'm sorry, I'm running an hour late. It's because my husband has to go to the bathroom and I have to help him get dressed. So I was able to share that with some people, but this amazing manager that I had helped me navigate this illness and this tragic circumstance that we were moving through. Without this person, I don't think we would have had the resources quite set up as an employer, although they did accommodate me taking time away as a caregiver even then with a type of family medical leave, even though that wasn't as robust as it is now. I just want to say that grief process, the anticipatory grief, I'm asked about a lot because we're grieving before somebody dies. We have our good days and our bad days. Denial actually is sometimes a very useful tool. Sometimes it's okay to be in denial as long as you're not denying that it's happening.
Mm.
But, I would get away to work, right? And work kind of started to become my escape from my real life. So when I went to work, people didn't know what I was going through. I wasn't being asked about it. I actually could invest myself in some of my time and pretend that my life was normal for a little while,
Mm.
to a certain extent, right? And so I hope that kind of paints a picture. And then as his disease started to progress over 4.5 years, I hired caregivers to come in, and we had to be resourceful and find money for that. And, we had to find what we needed in the resources so that we could still bring in an income. And I think that's what I want to make really clear with your listeners is, just because you're grieving, you still need money. And if we're lucky, society has put together some plans that we can take advantage of. I'm not as familiar in Australia what you guys do, but in the United States, we don't do much for people who are in those situations. You're lucky if you have health insurance that covers that. So, really finding the resources and the support, as well as the emotional support, is something that I became very invested in. I walked that journey, finding as much support as we could. And then transitioning to Kauai, I still worked for a friend in jewelry stores, and I managed really beautiful jewelry stores over time after Grant died. And I kind of reconnected professionally with my HR world over time. But it's a journey.
Mm.
It's really a journey. And you need everybody who can support you on that journey.
Thank you so much for sharing such a vulnerable time in your life. And I'm sure the listeners will take something from that. I'm sure someone listening to this now.
And I wrote it in the book.
I love
So
it.
I have to say, I wrote it in my book, of course, and and that's raw and vulnerable as well. So thank you for letting me share that.
No, thank you.
And I'd really like to know, though, Sheila, what exactly are you doing now? What are you doing in terms of how's that sort of situation then pivoted you, obviously, to write the book, but then also help other people?
I've always been an entrepreneur. And when I was in Hawaii after my husband died, I started a nonprofit, Healing Palms of Kauai, care for caregivers, because caregivers need to. And I had a place for people who are grieving to come in to like a retreat. My home that was a retreat after I purchased a home after Grant died. I started exploring grief certification programs and got a certification in the Grief Recovery Institute's program to kind of piece together what I didn't have that I knew people needed. So I started doing more of that. Interestingly enough, I phased out professionally. The island got really quiet. I dated all of the available and unavailable men on the island. 4.5 years after Grant died, it was time to leave. And I say, why would you ever leave a tropical paradise? If you've been to Hawaii or Kauai, it's a beautiful place. It's always different living there than it is vacationing and visiting.
Mm.
And it's a very expensive place to live. So I actually started realizing that I needed to do my work on the mainland. And what was fortuitous at the time was my mom was building a visiting angels home care for seniors business, and she needed a right arm. And this was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she needed an HR person. She needed PR marketing. She needed somebody to train caregivers. And we actually had patients with ALS. And I was able to reintegrate onto the mainland in Santa Fe, a slower community, slower paced community, and build professionally from my wheelhouse of all of those areas. And so I was able to support her and help her build that while I started taking coaches training up in Denver through the Coaches Training Institute. And I started creating grief wellness programs to help people rebuild their lives after their partners died. That was taking place, and I was building that business while I was writing my first 400-page crappy first draft of my book that I ugly cried all over and then had edited. And that's my book. And that's the book I needed to do before I could write this one. But in 2008, the economy tanked in the United States. I needed to get a regular job. I went back into my HR career, and I was working at a hospital, local hospital in the area. And I was trying to build my business while I was doing this at the same time. It allowed me to immerse myself back into HR, a really amazing health community, Boulder Community Health, and I really reconnected with my HR background that had started at Mazda Research and Development when I worked in the automotive industry years before. And so I kind of reconnected with working as an HR advisor. I did HR consulting with clinical and non-clinical departments. I did HR business partner, but also I did employee relations, mediation, talent acquisition, recruiting. And I was there for 9 years. And by the time I left, the hospital is going through a lot of changes with its HR, and they were dividing from an HR advisor that did all of these things into an HR business partner or talent acquisition department.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I left, I had 140 clinical positions I was recruiting for. I was doing HR business partner for about 8 to 10 different departments, and I was really overwhelmed.
Yeah, wow. Mm.
And so I say that because being in touch with supporting employees and supporting staff and ensuring that people are getting their needs met and managing all of the different programs, policies, leaves, all of that. I have experience in all of that, which is good for you to know, but I have an intimate experience with grief. And so from that professional place, I kind of bring all of that together. And I left BCH in 2017, kind of with my hair on fire, job burnout, opened up my LinkedIn, and I said, oh my gosh, I have 20 contacts. What do? I'm a career development specialist. I help people figure out what they're going to do professionally in their lives and meaningful, purposeful work. And so I started my transitions coaching business. January of 2018. I've had that for the last 6.5 years. It'll be 7 years in January. And
Amazing.
I could not have picked a better company through the pandemic or a better job, which is going to be a career coach. Because I don't know about you guys, but I had people come in that had, I've got some money to spend because I'm not going anywhere else. And I'm divorcing my husband. I'm getting a new job. I'm moving to a new place and I need help.
Yeah. All the change.
And so that's kind of when I came into that in COVID, through COVID, and I haven't looked back.
Yeah.
And it's been a challenging but really fun job and business to help people. My goal is to help people find a job they love and to continue to love that job. Mm-hmm. And that I measure my success on that.
I want to take you back, Sheila, back to your story where you were talking about Grant, and you were talking about your manager, your line manager, and you said he was really supportive. How can employers create a supportive environment for their employees dealing with that grief?
This is where I want to talk about positive intelligence, social intelligence, leadership, empathy, really managers managing people and not positions, and to really connect with the people that they're working with. I know in some HR circles and HR worlds, it's not professional to get to know your people sometimes as well as you might want to know them, right? In the US, we have a lot of laws. Oh, don't ask them too many questions about their health situation because that's off, that's not legally okay. Just, make sure that you're supporting them, but, we only have this amount of time that we can take off, right? And so I think that managers and leaders need to understand that they're people. We're all people. We're all human beings, and that we're going to have our good days and our not so good days. Some people are going to be TMI people. They're going to tell everybody way too much information, and you got to rein that in. And other people, you are never going to know what's going on in their life, and it can be the most horrendous thing that you'd ever known. So I think that managers really knowing their people, knowing their strengths, their values, what's important to them, but even taking the time to know who they are, what's going on, how can I support you, really that checking in with people. Because as you're developing those relationships and trust building over time, you're building that trust that someone is going to feel safe enough to tell you if something really big is happening in your life. And you can be a rock for that person. You can be a safe place for that person to connect to. Even, and I'm going to tell you, I had a therapist tell me, Sheila, you can make it through this successfully, even if you don't know what that looks like right now. But she planted that seed. And by planting that seed, I owned that that was a possibility. What's powerful about that is having a leadership team or a manager that can plant that seed and help you be successful in your job, in your performance, even if you're going through divorce, death, one of the most difficult times of your life. Sometimes that's caring for an aging parent while you're caring for your kids, right? And I think that we need to recognize that, and I think COVID taught us this too, people have lives. And we were able to see on Zoom and whatever we were on, we've got our cat sitting on the computer and a kid coming in and saying, hey, and, we're still doing our job okay. And so I want to say that you never know what that support will give, but I'm going to say the loyalty and the investment in doing a really good job for that person and with that person is very much a part of who most people are. And if you give somebody an opportunity where you treat them as a professional, as somebody who cares about getting their job and who cares about work, and then also might be going through a tough time, I think that as a leader, you can really bring a lot to that individual's life.
Yeah, I love that. Treating them as a human being. And I think we forget that. We think people are just robots showing up to work. They don't have, external things going on in their lives.
You guys might laugh at this. So I am all about Gallup Clifton Strength Finders. Okay. It is an amazing strengths finder tool. And I use it a lot. I've taken it several times. Empathy, believe it or not, fell out when I was in HR. How did that happen? Well, probably because I'm spending more time on the 10% of the people that I don't want to be talking to all of the time instead of the 90% of the people that I do want to be talking to all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe that's one reason. I don't know. Maybe I was doing way too much employee relations and getting burned out in investigations. And oh my gosh, are we going to do this today? Seriously, are we going to do this today? That could be a part of it too, right? So, I hope that gives you a little bit of a peek into kind of my mindset with regard to leaders, but also in terms of developing some empathy and fostering empathy and helping people to connect with some resilience is really, I think, managing people's paid time off really well. It's really knowing the policies and the programs and the benefits that a company has as a manager and as a leader, using your HR person as a part of your resource network, right? If you're not familiar with how all of these programs and policies work, that you're able to ask somebody to help you figure that out so that you can be a really good advocate for your team members, knowing there's a bereavement plan that you can take advantage of. There's a family medical leave plan. There's an employee assistance program where you can go and get 16 sessions of counseling, and then you can use your medical benefits to piggyback into that. It's about, I think sometimes you don't need to know all of the story. And maybe it's even good from a legal place to not know all of the story, but you can then still be an advocate for knowing how that employee can take advantage of that time off to do their mental health wellness and to take care of themselves, because self-care during grief is the most important thing that a person can do for themselves. But that self-care doesn't look like what it normally looks like, because if you're grieving, you're going through the grief wilderness and you've never been here before. You don't really know what that's going to look like. I didn't know what that was going to look like starting my journey as a caregiver for 4.5 years, living in anticipatory grief and my husband fading away, right? I could have never anticipated really what that was going to be or look like. And then I ended up there one day, all burned out and wanting to check myself into a psych hospital. Just that one given day because things weren't going so well, right?
Yeah.
And, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because if you do not laugh, sometimes you will just fall your face off. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes laughing's better.
And I actually really want to tap into a little bit more about empathy. It's such an amazing thing for leaders to cultivate. And I'm just curious, do you have any advice to someone listening to this and how they can maybe cultivate a bit more empathy and how they can show this in their workplace?
There are amazing programs that you can connect with in positive intelligence, and emotional intelligence. Clearly, there are a lot of resources out there that you can tap into. And each program is going to be a little different. But I do think that there are some training programs, some certification programs that people can tap into, really exploring positive intelligence, which is tied to that social intelligence that really some people have more of than other people, depending on how they're wired. And if you know that you're not wired in the best way for that, it might be really good to learn a bit more about maybe living into some strengths that you don't have, right? And some of that is maybe not doing it like the person who has all of those innate strengths, right? But you can learn to ask the right questions. You can learn to be more thoughtful of your own behavior. You can be more self-aware and self-conscious of how you're coming in and greeting that person on a given day, and that you are greeting that person on a given day, and not just running afraid to your office because you don't want to talk to them because you don't want to talk about grief. And oh my gosh, you don't want to be that person asking about that day. Because honestly, it's a lot to take on for someone who has a lot of empathy, for somebody who has been in some of those situations, but for somebody who socially, communication wise, who cannot attend to people in that space, that is foreign territory and it's terrifying. So I want to say whatever kind of support that you can get to just have a casual conversation and or to just let someone know, hey, I'm thinking about you. Just know I've got your back. I'm here for you. Let me know if you need anything. Sometimes just saying some of those things and not getting into a deep conversation is all that person needed, was to be recognized by you that day and for you to say hello. And I'm thinking of you and I'm here for you.
I think sometimes we can overcomplicate things and that stops people from reaching out or doing something about it because we get up in our heads, and it can literally just be that easy, right?
It can be that easy. And, separately, I want to say in the workplace, hugs aren't necessarily acceptable, but between colleagues, they might be, right? And if you're friends with your manager, a hug might be really acceptable, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes physical touch people, they just need a hug. They just need a tap on the shoulder, or not scaring them, if their back is turned to you, but just just tapping them on the shoulder, just like, I'm here for you. You've got this. You have a team that's here to support you, and also honoring and respecting that it's that person's story. It's that person's information for them to share and tell.
Yeah, true.
So it's really not the manager's responsibility to be telling other people. But I'm going to tell you, sometimes that's where that's hard, because you might look at an employee or other staff members like, why is that person allowed to take all this time off? Or why is this person allowed to do this? And if they don't know the full story, then all you have to say as a manager is, you don't know the full story. Maybe you don't know the full story. And that's not your story to know. Trust that if you need time off, we're going to support you with that too. So sometimes it really is in how you can manage that. And really, sometimes it doesn't take much. But if it does, there are times, let's say, that someone has passed away in the workplace, a colleague that is very well loved and well known, bringing in a grief counselor or a team of counselors from outside to come in and hold space for those people or those departments, people that worked closely, is so much better than ignoring that it ever happened. And so I was a part of a team. A colleague and I came into a nonprofit organization locally, and this person died tragically in a car accident in the wintertime with their dog, who they used to bring to the office. And this hit this team really hard. And we were able to come in and have kind of like some grief circles and also some one-on-one connection and support to really speak to the elephant standing or not standing in the room, to really say, we care, we're bringing these professionals in to support you here in the workplace. They're here if you want to take some time to go talk to somebody. And then this is a little different from that employee assistance program where they're calling people and working with them on the phone or online. They're actually there maybe for a week, or they're there for a certain amount of time to connect with somebody that they can talk in the moment kind of about some things. And then we also did, kind of like a celebration of life kind of in some grief circles to help people share their thoughts if they wanted to. And not everybody wants to, but that's where grief is an individual process. Some people need some things, other people don't. But it's important to have professionals come in and really hold space for people to be able to process what is happening. And I want to say that sometimes the hardest part about grief in the workplace is no one acknowledges that someone isn't there anymore, whether they died, whether they were laid off and fired or terminated. And all of a sudden, you can't get a hold of that person anymore. So if you weren't connected on Facebook or LinkedIn or other ways, you can't even talk to that person. So I want to say that sometimes this grief is what we might call ambiguous grief. And that ambiguous grief being a little bit more like, oh, that person that I used to go to all the time isn't there anymore. Where'd they go? They're not working here anymore. And then they don't tell you anything else. Okay. So I want to say in that grief, it's also job loss, terminations, firings, and that those be managed respectfully as well, if you can. And that's very hard for companies because people have so much access to proprietary information or confidential information or different things, right? Like they turn their computers off, they shut down their internet, they shut down their email. They tell them to pack up their office and then they're walking them out to their car. And I don't care what level of the company you are. You can be the CEO when they're doing that. Right. And I've worked with people that have had a really hard time with that loss aspect of not having a job any longer. And so I want to say, yes, we think of death and we think of divorce and job loss and loss of identity and doing our jobs every day is a really rough thing to work through and to wrap your head around as well. And as a career coach, I support people going through that too.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure so many listeners will get so much value from that, really resonate with what you've spoken about, Sheila.
This is just speaking to it all, right?
Yes.
We don't want to talk about it.
Exactly. So it's good on our podcast to have that moment where we can start to actually open conversations. For sure.
Yes, let's have conversations about grief because we're all experiencing it. And what I want to say is we're all grievers, past, present, and future. none of us are getting out of here alive. We just don't know when. And hopefully that's a long time from now. But it is still very important for us to recognize that, we're all in different boats going down the same river, and maybe we're on different continents going into the same or different ocean.
I love that.
But we're all in this human experience together.
I like that. Everyone's going to experience grief at some point. There's no point acting like it only happens to a few people, so we don't need to think about it, or we don't need to ask questions or have
People
conversations.
treat it like it's a communicable, contagious disease.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll have my book on one side. I'll have my career coaching stuff on another side if I'm doing an event. And people will walk by, and it's really funny to watch them, right? They'll see the book, and they'll see From the Depths of Grief to Hope, and they're like, oh, I don't need that. Ooh, but this, maybe I do need some help in finding a new job, or, Or then sometimes people are like walking up to this, I know exactly who needs your book, and I'm going to get 5 of them. And so it's it's really intriguing to me that I kind of walk both paths. And just so you guys know, why did I write the grief book and not the career coaching book? And I asked Spirit this all the time. Why am I writing this book? And I'm going to tell you, every single time a client would come in and they're like, they either were going through a divorce, they lost their best friend or spouse, or they lost their job. And they told me, I am grieving, and I don't need you to be my therapist, but I need you to help me figure this out. I need to put food on my table and pay my bills. And my head is like in the clouds, and I have grief brain. I can't figure this out on my own. And so trying to help people show up as their best selves when they're living their worst experience is something that I take seriously, and I feel very honored to support people through that process.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. Sheila, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. If people wanted to know more about what you do, where they can find your book, where could they go?
They can go to SheilaClemenson.com. That's where my book and everything about it is. My book is Over the Rainbow, From the Depths of Grief to Hope. They can find that on Amazon in every form, Kindle, written softcover, as well as Audible and iTunes version. With regard to transitions coaching, it's Transitions with an S Coaching Services with an S.com. And I offer complimentary sessions, and you can schedule online, and even in different time zones. I am an international coach, and honestly, I have a Japanese client in Tokyo. We figure it out. I've worked with people in a lot of different countries, and I would love to have an Australian client.
Oh, let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. I would love that.
100%. We'll put.
I worked with some Aussies during COVID, and they were amazing, amazing gentlemen with a group called Boomtown in Boulder. And so I just have to say that I do feel close to Australia. I was there, Sheila, and it was through a really tough time. And so I just want to say that my heart has a special place for you Aussies, and I would love to connect with you.
Yeah, well, you're always welcome down under, that's for sure. We'll put all of those details in the show notes as well for you, Sheila. But one last question that we like to ask all of our guests. If you were to give 30 seconds of advice to anyone listening right now, what would that be?
My advice would be that life is really short, no matter how long you have to live. So live it. Start doing more of what brings you joy and happiness, and work with people who will help you find ways to create more of that in your life.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode.
If you got value from this episode, it would mean the world to us if you could take 20 seconds out of your day and leave a 5-star rating and written review.
And remember, you have the power to make a lasting change in your workplace.